9:01 p.m., January 3rd, 1961. In the frozen desert of Idaho, an alarm blares through the darkness. It's not a bell, nor a siren. It's an electronic pulse, triggered by heat sensors deep inside the Area 602 military facility. For the firefighters who receive the call, it's the third one that day. The third time SL1, the reactor, has called them out. They gear up, annoyed, expecting yet another false alarm. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they didn't know was that there was no fire to put out. What they didn't know was that they were driving straight into an atomic nightmare. What they didn't know is that 3 men were already dead, or worse, and that the very air they were breathing was turning into an invisible poison. Minutes earlier, the atmosphere inside the reactor room had been routine. 3 young specialists: Army Specialist Richard McKinley, 27, Army Specialist John Burns, 22, and Navy Electrician Richard Dick Legg, 26. Their task was simple: restart the SL1 stationary low-power reactor number 1 after an 11-day shutdown for the holidays. A standard procedure, part of a grueling 9-month qualification program that had trained them to operate the machine. The most critical part? Manually reconnecting the 38-pound central control rod to its drive mechanism. A job that required lifting the rod just 10 centimeters. John Burns, the youngest, leaned in. His hands gripped the cold metal. 10 centimeters, a distance barely noticeable. But in the world of nuclear physics, even the smallest movement can hold the power of annihilation. And on that night, the line between routine and horror was about to be wiped out forever. But how could such a routine procedure go so terribly wrong? The answer, like so many tragedies of the 20th century, begins with the Cold War. To guard against a surprise Soviet attack, the United States built the DEW line, a network of Arctic radar stations. But how to power these remote outposts? The solution, devised by experts at Argonne National Laboratory, was revolutionary and terrifying: portable nuclear reactors. SL1 was one of them, an experimental reactor built in a rush. To be small and powerful, it was loaded with 14 pounds of uranium, 235, enriched to 93% military-grade purity, higher than the Hiroshima bomb. That made it incredibly unstable. And to make matters worse, it had no concrete containment dome. It was housed in Area 602, a steel building with thin walls, whose unsealed outer shell was only meant to protect against the weather. The question wasn't whether an accident could happen, but when. And time was running out. To control the instability, engineers inserted strips of aluminum boron into the core, a kind of neutron-absorbing poison. But this was a new, untested idea. Over time, heat and radiation corroded the strips. Pieces broke off, jamming the control rods. In the previous 2 years, the rods had jammed over 80 times. Each time, it took more and more force to move them. The reactor was becoming a ticking time bomb. And the trigger for that bomb was the central control rod, rod number 9. In a normal reactor, with hundreds of rods, no single one holds enough power to cause a disaster. Chernobyl's reactor, for example, had 211. SL1 had only 5. And its central rod was so powerful that if it was pulled out more than a few centimeters, it could send the reactor supercritical instantly. One mistake, with one rod, was all it would take. And on that night, John Burns was about to make that mistake. The rod was stuck. Burns pulled. Once, twice, nothing. He braced himself and used more force. Then it gave way. Suddenly, violently, the rod didn't rise 10 centimeters. It shot 50 centimeters out of the core. In 4 milliseconds faster than a blink, hell was unleashed. The reactor's power jumped from 3 megawatts to 20,000 megawatts, a power surge 7,000 times greater than normal. The water surrounding the core instantly boiled. The steam expanded with the force of an explosion. Pressure inside the reactor hit 650 atmospheres. The 12-ton, 26,000-pound vessel was hurled 9 feet into the air, crashing into the ceiling. Burns was thrown against the wall, his body crushed by the force of the blast. McKinley was sprayed with shrapnel, and Richard Legg, his fate was the most brutal of all. A steel shielding plug weighing over 200 pounds was ejected from the top of the reactor. It flew through the air and struck Richard Legg. The mass of metal impaled him, groin to shoulder, pinning his body to the ceiling beams. Instant death. In less than a second, the reactor room became a radioactive tomb. When the first responders arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. No smoke, no fire, just deadly silence. As they climbed the stairs to the reactor room, their radiation dosimeters went haywire. First, 25 Roentgens per hour. They backed away, thinking the equipment was broken. Using a higher range meter, they tried again. This time, the needle pegged at maximum, 500 Roentgens per hour, a lethal dose in under 60 minutes. They peeked through the door, total devastation, and a faint groan in a race against time and radiation. They entered. They found McKinley barely breathing. Burns was already dead. They carried McKinley outside to an ambulance speeding away, but it was too late. He died en route. The ambulance, now dangerously radioactive, was abandoned in the desert, McKinley's body still inside, a metal coffin in a barren wasteland. But where was the third man? Rescue teams, working in short, suicidal shifts, combed through the wreckage. Nothing. Then, a flashlight beam swept up the walls and stopped. There, on the ceiling, what they thought was a twisted piece of metal turned out to be a human silhouette. It was Richard Legg, pinned above the exposed heart of the reactor. The horror of the discovery was quickly overtaken by an even greater fear. Legg's body was in the most radioactive spot in the room, emitting over 1,000 Roentgens per hour, a lethal dose in seconds. And worse, if they tried to move him, the shielding plug pinning him might fall back into the core, displacing the fuel and causing a second explosion. Recovering a body had become a nuclear time bomb. What followed was one of the most dangerous recovery operations ever attempted. For 6 days, while Legg's body remained suspended in its radioactive tomb, engineers worked out a plan. A crane was assembled outside. A suspended litter was constructed. Teams of volunteers, knowing they'd receive radiation doses that could kill them years later, took turns in 65-second shifts inside the room of death. On January 9th, the operation began. Using long poles with hooks, crews, from a safe distance, prodded and pushed Legg's body, trying to free him from the metal plug. Finally, he came loose. His body was guided onto the litter and slowly lifted out of the reactor room. The impossible mission had succeeded, but the human cost was still being tallied. The 3 men's bodies were so radioactive they couldn't be buried normally. They were sealed in lead coffins, which were then welded inside metal vaults and finally encased in concrete. Tombs within tombs, to contain a poison that would remain active for thousands of years. The official investigation never determined exactly why Burns pulled the rod so far. The most likely cause was mechanical jamming, which forced him to yank harder. But rumors persisted for years, speculating about personal tensions among the men, including an alleged affair involving one man's wife and another operator. Never proven, the gossip adds a tragic, human layer to the disaster, suggesting distraction or rage may have played a role in that fatal pull. Whatever the reason, the SL-1 accident was a brutal awakening. It forced a complete overhaul of nuclear safety protocols, leading to the one-rod rule, ensuring that no reactor could ever again go critical because of a single error. Today, all that remains is a lone stone marker in a wind-swept field, a grave for 3 men and for a nuclear age of innocence that ended violently that January night. A reminder that, in the dance with the atom, one misstep can lead to eternity.